Hello everyone, I'm John Harrington, otherwise known as Dr. John, and this is my daughter Rhona. I was Chief Medical Officer for the Snowman Rally from 1987 until I retired from the day job in 2019, and Rhona has been a member of the signing on team at HQ with Monica Finlayson, Terry Urquhart and Fiona Moyer. As you can imagine, as CMO, I have seen many things over those years, from hilariously funny to extremely odd to distressingly tragic. Perhaps the most satisfying thing I've done is to bandage up a leaking oil pipe at the end of the Ord Hill stage. The oddest thing was a strange phone call on the eve of the rally when Ian Campbell was clerk of the course. The call came from someone claiming to be from the Health and Safety Executive, expressing grave concern about the rally and that he was going to see to it that it was cancelled. I remember our stewards, Jonathan Lord and the late Bill Trujillo, a great friend of Highland Car Club, being involved, and Ian Campbell and I going to the police station late at night. Of course, it was a hoax, but it was quite unsettling at the time, with the duties of a CMO. There have been tremendous changes to rally safety over those years, and the volunteer medical, rescue and recovery teams have come on significantly, both in terms of the breadth of their skill, the way they're organised and how incidents are approached. We have tended to focus on how good early care maximises eventual recovery, and that really applies to any injury. But a good example of this is head, or more specifically, brain injury care. Head injury care has been a subject of great interest and research in all sports in recent years, particularly in contact sports such as rugby, but also in motorsports where the human body is subject to extreme forces if something goes wrong in the forest or on the track. We can easily imagine how complex severe head injury rehabilitation is, but we are now recognising the importance of milder head injury. Basically, if someone sustains concussion, a further head injury soon afterwards can result in a much worse outcome. This is the reason for players being taken off the rugby field after a clash of heads to undergo a head injury assessment before being allowed back on the field. If they fail this assessment, they may have to miss out several subsequent games. So what has all this got to do with Rhona and I sitting in front of you here? Well, brain injury does not just result from trauma on the sporting field or indeed in a rally car, or indeed any kind of injury. This came very close to home and intensely personal for Rhona, her husband Gary, and indeed her whole family in October 2016 when she suddenly suffered a subarachnoid hemorrhage. This is a life-threatening or life-changing brain hemorrhage. My wife Deirdre and myself were on the Fishnish ferry returning from medical duties on the Mull Rally when we had a phone call from Gary to say that Rhona had collapsed with severe headache and convulsions in Asda in Aberdeen. I suppose Asda in Aberdeen's a good place because there's lots of care and help around her to help her at that stage. But to cut a very long story short, we headed straight for Aberdeen Royal Infirmary and discovered just before arrival what the diagnosis was. Subarachnoid hemorrhage is usually caused by a weakness in the blood vessel, otherwise known as an aneurysm, and results in bleeding under one of the layers of membrane surrounding the brain. When we arrived, preparations were already being made for her transfer to neurosurgery in Edinburgh, and she set off by ambulance in the wee sma' hours. Having just completed Mull, a third night in the car heading now for Edinburgh wasn't a great prospect. Rhona, of course, remembers very little of this and was very ill indeed. The next day, she underwent a very exacting and elegant procedure to seal off the aneurysm, and so began a slow but steady recovery. So one of our chosen charities for the event this weekend is Headway, and I'll pass you on to Rhona now, and she will tell you about how this charity has helped in her rehabilitation. So over to you, Rhona.
Thanks. So as Dad has said, in October 2016, I collapsed in the local supermarket and was subsequently diagnosed with a subarachnoid hemorrhage and rushed down to Edinburgh for emergency surgery. This came completely out of the blue, and the only warning I got was a thunderclap headache and losing control of my legs the moment before I collapsed. I've next to no recollection of the events that have followed, and only properly gained awareness after my surgery and a few days in the high dependency unit. Once I was onto a normal ward, the effects of my brain injury became more apparent. I had really debilitating headaches, which required heavy medication for well over a year and can still appear at any time. I had double vision and a squint, which persisted until I was referred to the eye clinic in Aberdeen for corrective treatment. Sensitivity to light, irritability and short-temperedness to a more extreme extent than I was previously known for, extremes of emotions, balance issues and dizziness, which persist today, really debilitating neurofatigue, which still makes the odd appearance, albeit less intense, memory loss and forgetfulness, confusion, particularly with words, and altered taste. My family had taken the sensible decision not to give me access to my phone while I was in hospital so that I couldn't Google the condition in the middle of the night. But when I was reunited with my phone, the Headway website proved a valuable resource for me as I began to understand and come to terms with what had happened to me. I was still really struggling to process information at that point, but Headway's website is helpfully written in a very clear and accessible way, which is no doubt to help those of us struggling to take information in. The enormity of how much recovery actually lay ahead didn't hit me until I came home to Aberdeen. I had to take one set of medication every 4 hours for a month, and I needed to set alarms so I remembered to do this. But this also interrupted my sleep, which was something I was needing lots of to recover. For the first few weeks, I also needed to drink at least 2 litres of water a day and had to write this on a notepad so that as my memory issues meant it was easy to forget how much I'd already had. But one of the hardest things was 2 months after surgery, still not having enough energy to stand up long enough for the kettle to boil and make myself a cup of tea. That was a very stark reminder of how long a recovery I was facing. The double vision and squint left me largely confined to the house, as I was too vain to wear an eye patch outdoors. But I was also too exhausted to walk any distance, and I couldn't look left and right quickly enough to cross the road without becoming dizzy and losing my balance. But fortunately, I was lucky enough to have a rolling squad of family members who took it in turns to come down to Aberdeen, each staying for a few days to help care for me and to help Gary out. Every person who suffers a brain injury will have a very different and individual experience and recovery, and this is something the Headway captures really well on their website. They also have useful tailored resources for the brain injury survivor, but also for friends or family members who are supporting that individual. I returned to work on a very phased basis 3.5 months after surgery, and 7 months after surgery, I passed 2 major milestones. I got my driving license back, and I got on a flight to Menorca for Dad's 60th birthday. For those 2 events, I turned to the Headway website, which includes a wealth of practical advice, such as finding specialist travel insurers, because cover is a bit more challenging now, and getting your driving license reinstated. I was also lucky enough to have a fantastic GP who dealt with all my GVLA paperwork. By July 2017, I was thankfully well on the road to recovery and only a few weeks away from returning to work full-time. With tiredness, headaches, and forgetting the odd word, the only real daily reminders of what had happened. Had I not made such a good recovery at that point, I would have applied for Headway's brain injury identity card when it launched that month. This is a card that's designed to help people, such as police officers, more easily identify brain injury survivors and ensure that they receive appropriate support. Each card is personalised, helping the cardholder explain the effects of their brain injury and any support they may particularly need. And this card is another example of the practical ways in which Headway supports people with brain injuries. My subarachnoid hemorrhage was caused by a ruptured brain aneurysm. And although the surgery was successful, a part of that aneurysm is still getting a blood supply. So I remain under the care and observation of the surgical team in Edinburgh and have regular MRI scans to monitor the behaviour of the remaining part. Further surgery in the future remains a possibility, but all things considered, I'm incredibly lucky to have made such a good recovery when the initial prognosis was far from certain. During my recovery, I made and I continue to make a lot of use of online support groups and social media platforms such as Headway's Facebook page. I'm reminded of just how far I've come when I see others on these groups who are struggling with the same issues I had, and I share my experiences with them to offer some hope that things might get better. Last year, on the same weekend as the 2020 Snowman Rally, I completed my first half marathon in Inverness. And I was delighted to be able to share photos of me at the finish line, surrounded by family, with people in these support groups. That was without question one of my proudest moments. In addition to the many online sources of support I've just mentioned, Headway also have local support groups throughout the UK, and the Highland region is particularly well served with 7 groups stretching from Fort William to Thurso. Compare that to just one group in Grampian where I live. So as someone who was involved with the Snowman Rally for over 15 years, I'm delighted that Highland Car Club has picked Headway as one of its chosen charities.
Thank you, Rhona. So as Rhona has said, Headway does very important work in the rehabilitation of head injury, irrespective of cause, by supporting patients, offering practical advice of all sorts, including regulations and legal advice as well. Rhona and her whole family have much to thank the work that Headway does, and I would urge you to support this worthy cause today. So that's the end of our bit. It's not often you get to interview your daughter on Zoom or online, and thanks very much indeed for listening to us.